Today we will discuss about the mechanism of enzyme action. In the previous class we have discussed learn about the enzyme classification and its nomenclature. Now this enzyme action is quite interesting, and the way the enzyme actually works, and it gives the product. So we will study the detailed analysis how exactly the enzymes speed up the rate of reactions and produce the product. So in enzyme catalyzed reactions, mostly what we have to keep in mind is the active site and the substrate. Okay, so substrate, as I told you, they are the specific to the active sites. Okay, so the substrate and the enzyme active site, they binds and they produce the enzyme substrate complex. Okay, now this enzyme substrate complex is very important, because particularly in this situation, all the chemical reactions, that is the breaking of a old bond, making of new bonds, transition state, activation energy, all these are involved. So this enzyme substrate complex stage is very important, that ultimately leads to the products. Okay, so this is what the basic overall the way by which the product can produce by the enzyme. Okay, so enzymes are the biocatalysts, and they only speed up the rate of a chemical reaction. Okay, the speed जो है वो increase करेगा, that is the enzyme. Okay, so there are the two ways by which it can speed up the rate of a reaction. First is what is they reduce the activation energy. Okay, and second is the stabilizing the transition state. So activation energy and the transition state, these are the two more important factors that determine the speed of a reaction. An enzyme actually modify or manipulate these two particular things, that is the activation energy and the transition state. इन दोनों चीज़ों को मैनिपुलेट करके एंजाइम जो रिएक्शन की स्पीड है वो it will increase, right? So first what we need to see, it is the energies. Okay, the free energy is generally what it is, the energy that is required to do a chemical work. Okay, so this is the energy that is available to do the cellular work. Okay, generally we denote it by the delta G. Okay, delta H minus T delta S. Okay, delta is what it is the enthalpy, and delta S is what is the entropy at particular temperature T. Okay, so this is what the free energy. Now the more important for us is what it is the activation energy. Now the activation energy, what is the minimum amount of the energy that is required by the reacting molecule. Okay, ultimately to produce a product. Okay, so activation energy is the energy that required by the reactant molecule to produce the product, that is called activation energy. So this activation energy, for example, in chemical reactions, when the reactant molecule at their initial state, they finally produce the product here. Okay, to do this they have to cross this much of the energy barrier, and this is called as the activation energy, right? Second most important thing is the transition state. Now the transition state is actually a high energy state where, okay, what will happen, the reactant molecule become unstable. Okay, that is, if the reactant molecule is A and B, okay, so these two molecules, reactant molecules, become unstable. That means they prepare themselves to take parts into the reaction for the production of a product, right? The old bonds, they get broken and the new bonds are produced in this state. Okay, these two reactants A and B, they neither exist in a reactant form nor the product form. Okay, they actually are in the process of intermediate to produce a product, right? And this particular state is actually very short lived. Okay, that finally leads to the production of a product. That means A and B, these two reactants, they reach to a state that is called as transition state. इस state में क्या क्या होता है? A, that is the reactant become unstable, the old bond become broken, and the new bond produced. Okay, so these A and B reactant molecule, they have to reach to these particular area. Okay, इसको बोलेंगे हम transition area. Okay, जब ये transition area में पहुंचेंगे तब जाके final C and D, that is the product, will be produced. So the transition state is very important. Okay, So the ultimately two things are very important. One is the activation energy, second is the transition energy. ये दोनों चीजों को एंजाइम क्या करेगा, मैनिपुलेट करेगा in the order to produce the product, right? So in this way the enzyme actually reduce the activation energy. Okay, so for example we have this the catalysis reaction without the enzyme. Okay, you can see the amount of the activation energy is quite high, okay, to reach to the product here. Okay, that means this is what is too much of high energy of activation will require, okay, when there is no catalyst on the enzyme. What will happen when we add the enzyme? When we add the enzyme actually they reduce the activation energy. That means the activation energy become less or reduce. Okay, so enzyme reduce the activation energy in the order to produce the product. Okay, जितनी एक्टिवेशन एनर्जी कम होगी प्रोडक्ट उतने जल्दी प्रोड्यूस होगा. सो हाउ कैन एंजाइम दे रिड्यूस दिस एक्टिवेशन एनर्जी? ठीक है, सबसे पहले है द सबस्ट्रेट व्हेन दे बाइंड्स टू द एक्टिव साइड ऑफ एंजाइम, ट्रांजिशन स्टेट क्या होगी, वो प्रोड्यूस हो जाएगी. ठीक है, जिसमें क्या होगा, जब सबस्ट्रेट बाइंड होगा एक्टिव साइड से, वहां पे उसकी प्रॉपर पोजिशनिंग होगी, ओरिएंटेशन होगा, सो दैट इट फिट्स टू द एक्टिव साइड प्रॉपरली, एंड देन द बॉन्ड्स इन द सबस्ट्रेट कैन बी एक्टिवेटेड. ठीक है, दैट मीन्स बॉन्ड प्रोड्यूस होना शुरू हो जाएगा इन बिटवीन द ग्रुप्स विच आर प्रेजेंट इन टू द कैटालिटिक साइट्स. सो ये सारी चीजें होंगी तब जाके एक्टिवेशन एनर्जी रिड्यूस करेगा एंजाइम. ठीक है, उसका बाइंडिंग देखेगा, पोजिशनिंग देखेगा, ओरिएंटेशन देखेगा, एंड देन बॉन्ड बनना शुरू हो जाएगा बिटवीन द सबस्ट्रेट इन द एक्टिव साइड ऑफ द एंजाइम्स. सो ये सब होगा तब जाके एक्टिवेशन एनर्जी को लेस किया जाएगा. सो ट्रांजिशन स्टेट जैसे मैंने बताया इज अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट स्टेट इन द ऑर्डर टू प्रोड्यूस अ प्रोडक्ट, राइट. सो जब हम विदाउट एंजाइम रिएक्शंस को देखेंगे, ये जो सबस्ट्रेट है दैट इज रिएक्टेंट मॉलिक्यूल, ये जब ट्रांजिशन स्टेट में जाएगा, ओके, फिर फाइनली ये प्रोडक्ट प्रोड्यूस होगा. बट इसके लिए क्या लगेगा, दे रिक्वायर द हाई डेल्टा जी, दैट इज द मोर एक्टिवेशन एनर्जी टू प्रोड्यूस द प्रोडक्ट. What will happen when we use the enzyme in the reactions? Okay, the enzyme they binds to the substrate, okay, and the binding is very proper, orientation is very proper, so that the transition state is actually stabilized. Okay, यहाँ पे देखिए सबस्ट्रेट भी उसी हिसाब से बेंड हो गया जिस प्रकार से एंजाइम उसकी बाइंडिंग थी. ठीक है, सो इसको बोलेंगे हम स्टेबलाइजेशन ऑफ द ट्रांजिशन स्टेट. और जब ये ट्रांजिशन स्टेट आएंगे तो प्रोडक्ट जो है आपके वो they will produce early, because of the speed of the chemical reaction will be reduced. ठीक है, so यहाँ पे क्या होगा, देखिए यहाँ पे activation energy is getting reduced. ठीक है, so this stabilization of transition state by the enzyme is actually important for the speeding of the chemical reactions. Let's see the mechanism of this enzyme actions in a quite detailed manner. So the catalyst is what? They increase the speed of reaction. They produce a product. Okay. So these catalysts actually they do not use up in the reactions. Only they helps in the speeding the chemical reactions. Right. Now these catalysts, they actually how they work. Okay. They produce a product from in a alternate way. Okay. By reducing the activation energy or the lowering the activation energy instead of the complicated line. So in this energy barrier, okay, when we have to take a molecule to a particular product, right, they have to cross this much of the energy barrier. Okay, so this is what actually energy barrier is called, the activation energy. This is the energy that is required for the reactant molecule. So this particular amount of the energy that is required for a reactant molecule to go into the production state. Okay, so this is the energy barrier that is called the activation energy. So the enzyme actually lowers the energy of reactions, okay, and increase the rate of a reaction, and they are not consuming a reactions, right. So when we add the enzymes into the reaction, the activation energy is actually get reduced. Okay, so the reactant molecule and the product. Okay, in between this you can see this is the energy barrier. Okay, so this energy barrier is quite high when there is no enzyme, right, and it become reduced when there is the enzymes. Okay, so ultimately time required to is less. Now let's see the mechanism of activation energy. This activation energy actually when we plot the energy and the reactants into the XY axis, okay, there you can see a particular curve obtained that defines the reactant product and the amount of energy that required to go into the transition. This is a quite high energy activation, okay, when there is no enzymes. Okay, so the activation energy is quite large to produce the product. Okay, when we do not use the enzyme. When we add the enzymes into the reaction mixture, okay, there you can see the activation energy with the enzyme is quite less. Okay, this is a small activation energy is required. So ultimately reactant molecule goes to the product. Okay. So how does enzyme reduce the activation energy? So suppose this is the enzyme. Okay, this enzyme, this is the reactant molecule as is substrate, and these are the product that is produced. Okay. So this is whole enzyme catalyzed reaction, for example. So this is what the reactant molecule of this substrate when it binds to the enzyme molecule. Okay, so it become binds to the active site. So the pressure will be created from all the side on the substrate molecule. The pressure means what? That it become unstable. Okay, so unstable होने की वजह से जो पुराने बॉन्ड्स हैं टूट जाएंगे उसमें से. Okay, वहाँ पे प्रेशर आने की वजह से it become unstable, and this instability will leads to the production of the products, right? There is the another way of reducing the activation energy just by say suppose this is the substrate now and this is the product now. Okay, this is product. So these two reactant molecule, okay, when they fits into the active side of enzyme, okay, since they are complementary, so they can easily fit into the active side enzyme. So two reactant molecules become very close to each other. Okay, become near to the proximity. वो एक साथ आ जाते हैं in which is complementary to the product. So they become close to the proximity. Therefore, the product produced. Right. So in these two way actually, one is what? Bringing together two reactant molecules close together on the active side. They leads to the formation of the product. Okay. Or another way of reducing activation energy is what? It is the exerting the pressure on the substrate molecule that leads to the production of the final product. Okay, so these are the two ways by which. So the Y energy required in a transition is less because the active side is actually a magic pocket. Okay, this is the active side of the enzyme. Now this enzyme actually reduces the activation energy. Okay, सबसे पहले क्या करेगा? Stabilize the transition state. That means the substrate binds to the active side, it becomes completely stable. Okay, it binds to it from all the four sides. Second is what? It expels the water. That means water cannot enter into the active side. So there is no interference with the substrate of water molecule to bind with the active side. So substrate will bind freely to the active side and then tightly because there is no interference of water molecule. Third is what? Is the reactive groups. Okay, positive, negative charges on the substrate and the active side. That helps in the binding very tightly. That is, the binding is proper because of the different charges present on the active side and the substrate molecule. And the last is what? The coenzymes. Coenzymes which are present in the active side helps in the binding of the substrate very tightly. Okay. So this is what the enzyme does, the activation energy by exerting the pressure on the substrate and by bringing two reactants in a close proximity. So this is all about today's lecture, and this is all about the mechanism of enzyme action. So enzyme speed up the chemical reaction by reducing the activation energy and by stabilizing the transition state. These are the two basic reasons for the catalyzing the reactions by the enzymes. Okay? So this is all about today's class. We will continue in the another class with another new topic. Thank you for now.